Hello and welcome to Heather and Hops. My name is Katt and I'm a knitter based in Hertfordshire in the United Kingdom. This has been my little space on the internet where I have documented my knitting journey from day one through to now. Throughout the journey I have had the blessing to be able to connect with other knitters, and today I guess is sort of no exception. It's a slightly different episode and I'm going to have a little bit of my drink and I'm going to do some knitting while I talk to you about a project that I have been sort of planning. So, little Audrey is here in case you hadn't noticed. She's just woken from a slumber. I think I have woken her up. Just going to make sure I am ready to knit because we don't want any tangles. There we go. So, the project that I want to talk to you about is something that I had really wanted to start in January 2019, and I realised that is a year and 9 months ago. But I hadn't been knitting very long when I had the idea. And I must put my phone on silent. The idea being that I would knit something from every decade, starting in 1920 in January 2019. So then I would do 1930 in February 2019, and then when December hit, I would knit like a very new project, so something ideally that was released that month. But life happens. I was very much suffering from chronic illness, which brought me to knitting, and life really did just happen. It was a bit of a rough year, and I feel like now's the time to start this project. And I started sort of planning probably 3 months ago when I decided it was finally time to dive in. It was time to work on this project wholly. So I went down a bit of a rabbit hole and I started looking at the history of knitting. And boy was I overwhelmed. It's been with us since forever, basically. It's been with us for a long, long time. And I was quite overwhelmed with the information, but also really excited. So I started digging, and the more I dug, the more I knew that I wanted to go a bit further. I didn't necessarily just want to knit from every decade. If you do know me and have known me for a little while, you will know that there's part of me that's always been quite inspired by vintage styles. I've not necessarily always worn accurate, but I've always almost history bounded. Less so recently, and less so when I was a teen, but for my early 20s through to my mid 20s it was something that I loved to do, but different life happens and I felt like it was not the right thing for me to do. But I do own, a lot of the clothing I own is kind of interchangeable with that. Anyway, so when I was looking, and I must say up front that I do, as a side effect of my illness, is with brain fog. And that's fine, but it's just something to bear in mind. And I'm definitely not a historian, definitely not a researcher. So what you'll hear from me is tiny little blimps rather than in depth. And I would love to take it more in depth, and I would love to talk to people that know more and have time to research more, but obviously funding, time, resources, it's just a little bit out of my scope. However, what I discovered in a nutshell, a huge overview, a very big understatement, is that knitting has really gone through evolutions and stereotypes have changed so much over the years. And I'm hoping that through this even more so, but I know that we are dissolving them as we go as a community and network, and I really hope we continue to do so. So I'm hoping that becomes part of this journey too. So starting at the beginning, now binding, different places pronounce it slightly differently from what I understand, was the precursor to knitting. And it dates back to 6000 BC. So you can understand when I say that this is, you know, this is a really old craft. And it was definitely the precursor to knitting and can sometimes be confused for knitting. The main difference on just looking is that you use one needle and it is done using lengths of yarn as opposed to using knitting from a ball or a cake as we do now. It would have been lengths, so slightly more akin to sewing, and I believe from what I've seen that the technique is more akin to sewing too. It was sometimes referred to as knotless knitting or single needle knitting. One of the items I wanted to share, just because it was quite cool, is some knitted socks from Egypt, and they're knit in 3-ply wool, and if you can, I mean, it's quite obvious, but they're designed to be worn with sandals, and as a sock and sandal lover myself, I really appreciate this. I often wear Birkenstocks with socks, which doesn't require such fantangled technology, but I just thought they were really cool. So we're coming back forward in time a little bit now, and one of the first sort of, that I could find, artifacts of knitting, actual knitting, not now binding, goes back to 250 AD, which is, you know, as you can imagine, quite a long time after. And the reason, and this was actually discussed in Loretta's book, and it was a very interesting book. I do still recommend it as a book. It was quite a nice, gentle read, as I mentioned in the last video. But the main reason that now binding fizzled out was due to economics. So is, and I'm sure maybe this is, I don't know, I'd love to test it myself, but it was slower than knitting with 2 needles. So 2 needles, essentially twice the pace. I'm not sure that that's accurate, but it did mean more money, which is a shame really, but it does look like, I will try and link it below, there's a heritage website that is trying to keep the craft alive in the UK, and I just think that's really cool. Maybe we should have a, how many times I'll say cool in this video counter. But yeah, moving forward yet again, and like I said, I'm really doing just a brief little introduction to bring us to where we are with this project. I'm not going to talk about the entire history. But the next period of time that I just wanted to note upon is, just because I found it interesting and kind of boggled my brain, so to speak, is the period of time where the Knitting Madonna became a thing and became very prevalent in paintings in particular. This was in the 14th century, and she was depicted so often, and also when she was depicted as the Virgin Mary. And what I just found interesting about that was, I don't know, and I guess we can use our minds and be playful, so that's one thing. But it was just quite interesting, as we have no confirmation that knitting would have been around then. You know, if we've only, the oldest one we've found is 250 AD. I just thought it was quite cool that, you know, just thought it was very cool. So the part I want to talk a little about today, which has led me to this journey directly, is knitting guilds. One of the first sort of mentions that I spotted was of a knitting guild in Paris in 1268. However, you do need to jump forward, quite far forward to be honest, about 200 to 300 years later for this to be more common practice, especially over here in the UK. I found this image and I just again thought this was quite cool, but this engraving is from 1698, so much further down the line, but it shows the different stages of knitting a stocking. So you've got spinning the wool, cleaning it, knitting it and finishing it, and it's by Christoph Weigel in 1698, like I said. It's so cool being able to see these artifacts and a little sort of glimpse into the past. But hose or stockings were really a fundamental part of the Renaissance, men's attire in particular. And because they wanted to have well-fitting stockings, because it was a big faux pas to be wearing, you know, baggy stockings even then, that, I mean, not that I would judge anyone for having baggy stockings, but, you know, in sort of a response to this, knitting guilds showed up more and more, and they were young men that were women were not allowed to be a part of a knitting guild back then, from what I can gather. And if you were a young man and you wanted to become a master knitter, and they were the people that really made the best stockings, which I believe you can still do today. I haven't done much research on that either, but from memory, I think there is a Knitting Guild of America that do offer master knitting sort of qualification. But anyway, what you would have done is you would have spent 3 years essentially as an apprentice underneath a master knitter, or a few I should imagine, and although I'm sure they did knitting, I'm not sure how much knitting they did, whether it was more sort of upkeep of workshops and basic knitting or what, but I'd love to know more. But I understand that you would learn the basic skills, and then once you'd spent 3 years as an apprentice, you would then essentially become a journeyman, and you would travel for a further 3 years across the world, or the countries, the world of the country, yeah, both. And you would learn foreign knitting techniques. This, I think, is pretty amazing. And I guess if you were back then, you would have to note things down. You wouldn't be given, like we are today, like knitted patterns. So you'd have had to have found a way to write things down, and or memorize them even more so, maybe. I don't know. I just thought it was really cool that you would spend 3 years learning different techniques to then come back and create what is your masterpieces, which I just thought was, again, quite interesting and really, you know, when you have those sort of whoa moments and you realise masterpieces, that totally makes sense. Just like break fast. Yeah, I like those sort of things that should be really quite obvious but doesn't click. But you would come back and do your masterpieces, and these would vary, but usually you'd have 13 weeks to complete the masterpieces, and this would usually include a cap, a jacket, a pair of gloves with fingers, and a wall hanging or carpet. Carpets could look like this one. I just thought this again was a really cool example, and this tells the story of, or depicts, Jacob's dream from the Old Testament, and it is knitted in wool, and I just think it's a beautiful piece of work. I wish I could go back in time and talk to the knitter that did it. Other things that you might have knitted would be stockings, a shirt, or maybe even a waistcoat. I do have a very good waistcoat pattern. Anyway, since I've kind of documented my 2-year journey so far, I'm seeing it as if I have done 2 years of an apprenticeship. You know, I've been learning base knowledge and honing my basic knitting skills, and that the goal is, and the bigger project really is, to continue to do my honing and my basic skill learning for the next year or so, and not necessarily by focusing primarily on modern patterns, but focusing half and half, maybe more so on old patterns, but sort of vintage patterns, to try and explore techniques and feel a little bit more connected to this time period, although I will be knitting from a bit later because it is quite difficult, I found, to find older patterns, but it's not impossible. Hoping to get a little bit of my decades knitting project in there and do a blend, but I won't, I won't pressure myself into doing something from every decade. I'll just see as my creativity and also usefulness of an item sort of feels. Like, I don't want to just knit things that aren't going to be used or useful or even gifted. So I want to be conscious of that. But this means that I'll have done 3 years of apprentice knitting essentially by next September or October. I'll probably aim for October. And then for the further 3 years, what I would really like to do is to delve deeper and start to look at techniques from around the world a little bit more deeply and a little bit more consciously. So obviously with funding and the world as it is, this would be very difficult to do in real life. However, what I'm hoping is that by embarking on this journey from home, essentially, I can connect with makers across the world, knitters, friends, pattern designers that will be able to guide me in directions of local techniques or, techniques that they've found and discovered and loved, whether it's from their town, their country, or completely somewhere else. And then I can, learn these techniques and maybe delve into them a bit deeper, and I think it will be easier to do slightly technique by technique as opposed to knitting history as a whole, because that is a very big, broad topic. And I think it would be really nice to sort of spend 3 years exploring the world as a journeyman of knitting, as a Knitting Guild apprentice would do, but here and now and knowing all we know. So there you have it. And you might have guessed, because I am a bit ludicrous and really quite excited about this, what I would like to do at the end of the 6 years is spend 13 weeks, as would have been spent, knitting the masterpieces. I'm not convinced that mine will be masterpieces, but I definitely have an intention and an excitement to do so. I definitely would like to do a hanging or carpet, and I would love, initially I thought it would be really fun to show off the world's techniques, and I might be able to do so, but I thought with the weight of knitting a carpet or a wall hanging, different techniques might be hard to do with that weight of yarn. But what I've come to the sort of decision, and it might be that I can incorporate techniques into this, but I would love to do a carpet that depicts the history of knitting, and obviously it's such a broad subject, but it would give me an opportunity to delve deeper into it and hopefully be able to pinpoint a few key points in our history that I can depict and use to tell the story, and maybe even incorporate a little bit of what's going on now with the yarn bombing and gentle protests that are happening around the world with knitting at the moment. So I just thought this is a really cool way to go on a journey whilst being able to connect with the knitting community, with the making community, with historians, but also learning myself and growing, because as a person, learning is just one of the things that brings me so much joy. And as you might have guessed, the other is connecting with people that are passionate about things. And honestly, those things could be basically anything. I have been to lectures on pepper, on fermentation and fermented foods, and I tell you what, my love of pepper has never been stronger. I been to see a potter's home studio, and every turn he was going, oh, and I felt so inspired by anyone that I meet that has a passion, that I'd love to pay that on to you guys if I can, because I really do have a passion and a love for this, and I want to do, you know, something nice for this community, and even if that's just connecting a few more of us together, then I'd love to do so. So all that to say, that is my big goal, big picture. 3 years apprenticeship, 3 years as a journeyman, 13 weeks as a masterpiece knitter, which is terrifying but really exciting. And I do really hope that it might inspire 1, 2, 3 people to either join me or connect and share techniques from where they're from or ideas, because, I don't know, I'm just really excited. So I digress, but I have actually started this project already, and I have begun with a very special project to me, and I will insert some footage because it's just behind me and I am working on this knitting project at the moment. But I have started knitting a jumper from the Columbia Book of Yarns, and the book itself was first published, from what I can tell, in 1901 by Anna Schumacher. Well, she was the writer, and the publisher was Columbia Yarns, who are based in Philadelphia, I believe, so this is an American pattern. And I think for the first few, well, for the first year I will be predominantly knitting British and American patterns, and that is more because they're easier to find, and again, it's an apprenticeship level, and that would have been what was done, sort of thing, if that makes sense. This book is fantastic, and I will link to a download of it, and there's definitely a few more things I'm gonna knit from this if I can, but as and when, obviously. So a few things up front is just that I wanted to point out is how cool it is this book essentially has a photographic gauge, needle gauge and hook gauge on one of the first few pages, which was quite a cool little thing to find. And what I should do is print it out to ensure that I am getting correct needle sizes, but I just thought it was a really cool, simple way of being able to know that you've picked up the right needle size by referring to your book. So the garment I'm starting with is, like I said, called the Lady's Sweater, and it's on page 132 of the book, should you wish to refer to it or make one yourself. It uses what they're referring to as a New English stitch, and it uses basically a simple 3x3 rib, and it's alternated, and it gives almost like a checkerboard effect. I'm knitting this in Whistlebear yarn, which I'm very excited to say I am now an ambassador, which I never thought I would be for anything, but I truly love the yarn, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to do so and to share about it. I am not told that I have to share. This is purely because I want to. I hope that you know that about me by now. I do kind of what I want and as nicely as I can, but this is because I really want to share. Having met the goats, they, you know, they mean a lot more to me, and the yarn means even more to me now too. It was already beautiful before, and I was already stoked to be using it, but now, you know, it pulls on the heartstrings more when you've seen their little faces. But the pattern called for what I believe is old US size 4 and 12, and through a bit of research, it seemed to me that that would be the equivalent of 3.5mm and 2.25mm needles. I will try and put the new ones below. It might be that they're the same, just in case. And the yarn recommended is 5 hanks in one colour of Columbia worsted knitting yarn. And from a little digging, it seemed to be a sport weight yarn. I'm not 100% convinced, but again, I didn't want to spend too much time Well, I did. I really wanted to spend too much time on this, but I don't have the, I don't have the time just yet. But I intend on making time to dig more deeply into this subject. But I wanted the item to be a little bit warmer than just a sport weight, given the shaping of it. I just thought it would look fantastic as an over piece rather than just a sort of house jumper, if that makes sense. So I felt like using the Yevering Bell Aran weight was the way to go. And I know that from experience that my tension can be a little bit loose. I'm quite a relaxed knitter. So I was a bit worried that maybe if I had used a sport weight yarn, there's no gauge given, that it might have been a bit loose and not quite done the trick as the outer piece that I wanted. So I figured that the Aran weight would create a slightly denser fabric and therefore be more close to what I require, because I'm not totally about historical accuracy here, if you can see or guess. I kind of want usable pieces that are going to be loved rather than just sort of don't do the job that I'd like them to do. So the postman's here. 2 parcels, both for Alex, probably bike parts. So I think that I finished talking about the yarn choice. Aside from that, the colourway that I decided to go for was called Solitude, which is sort of a slightly warm grey. It's like it's definitely a beautiful grey, but with a sort of slightly red undertone, and I really like it. It's a bit different for me because I often go for really cool blue greys almost. But with it being called Solitude and knitting really bringing me solace at the moment, I kind of felt like it was just the perfect combination. I did almost opt for a green, which would have been a bit dark like this skirt green, and I did think that would be very cool, but I have actually got some yarn for another project and it would have been very similar, and not similar pieces, but it would have been a similar colour, and I didn't really want to do that just yet. So I've also reduced the pattern size, so it's written for 36 to 38 inch bust, and I did start to do the maths myself but then read the entire pattern and noticed that there was directions for a 34 inch bust. So I am really hoping it fits me, but I have followed the 34 inch bust directions, which I was very happy to cast on, I must admit. Alex, if you're watching, isn't that always just funny? Must admit. It never comes out of my mouth sounding like I must admit. It always sounds like a mit. Anyway, so strange. Welcome to my brain, everyone. It's lovely to welcome you into it. So far I've worked the whole of the back apart from the ribbing, and I have also worked one of the fronts and load up on yarn, and got sort of halfway through the second front, and I've got to say I'm really enjoying it. It's a slightly different construction method for me, but it doesn't seem too wild yet, and I'm quite excited that there's going to be some seaming to do on it, which I never ever thought I would say, but I'm really enjoying the structure. Ooh, go back. Colour work while chatting is maybe, yeah, it's fine. Don't know what I was saying, which isn't a surprise. But seaming, I really like the structure so far from what I've experienced that seaming gives, and I'm more than happy to put in the work of working backwards and forwards and seaming because of that structure. And yeah, I definitely feel like I'm already learning. It's nice to be doing something that's slightly unfamiliar. Even the photograph or engraving that you can see think it's a photograph, I'm sure it's a photograph, isn't very clear. It's not the highest quality. So it is a bit of a mystery still what it's going to look like. And there is parts in the pattern where it just says rib, I think, like ribbing. So I just guessed that all the ribbing's the same. But even if it wasn't, I would probably adjust it to be the same, because that's the kind of person that I am. And I really just can't wait to see where this project takes me, if I'm honest. I think it's a really nice one, and if there's knitters that want to get involved somehow, I'd be really glad to connect through this project. It's really nice to sort of have a direction. And as much as I love just knitting for its therapeutic benefits, for having met the knitting community, having worked within it, and not so much, well, not now, it is quite nice to know that I'm going to be able to continue learning, and I don't know, it just feels like it's not just my own journey now. It is, but it feels a bit more that it's something that I can really share. So anyway, I hope you really enjoyed this sort of intro to this project. I hope that it kind of made sense and it was slightly interesting to you. Do let me know your thoughts, let me know what you're working on, and it might be a little early, but if you do have any techniques that you love, make local to you or from afar, I'd be really grateful to hear from them, either down in the comments, which I'm really grateful and proud to say that I'm getting much better. I do check them a lot more regularly and try to reply the second I see them now. So I will do my best to continue to do that for as long as I can, and I will definitely be noting down any techniques, and hopefully I will have a plethora of techniques to try and research even ahead of time, so I can start gathering and not rushing, because I know from experience that I'll tell you a secret. So my second to last essay that I ever handed in at university, I might have gone through the hassle of pairing all of my socks at 6 o'clock in the morning after having not slept. Gosh, this feels really naughty. Rather than finish my essay because I couldn't face it. I did hand it in on time. I did do quite well, which I'm very grateful for, but I will not ever put myself under that pressure ever again. And I will certainly not procrastinate. I will still pair my socks though, because only my hand knits. My other ones do get paired too, because I do quite like to wear matching socks. Mostly because they're different lengths, not because... Anyway, I will also like to start planning the carpet now, or wall hanging, which is also quite wild, but maybe I will do sort of a few squares and start to collate ideas now, because I think trying to do it while I just think it's quite good to plan ahead if I can and start getting ideas together. And again, if you have ideas or you want to get involved, I would be really grateful. I'd be really excited to share it. I will stop waffling now and hope to show you more on this journey very soon. I'm so grateful that you are here. I know for many it's a bit of a wild ride at the moment, and my heart really is going out to a lot of people. Someone referred to it as a public service announcement, and I really don't want it to come across too public servicey, but every time I finish an episode, but I do really hope that you are finding time to look after yourself, to check in with people that you love, and to, you know, love each other as best you can and stay grounded. It's a hard time, and I don't have any doubt that everyone is going to get through okay. I really am so grateful that you've been here to join me. I hope that I can continue to offer a moment of calm or silliness and a bit of enjoyment into your day, maybe give you an excuse to sit down with some knitting, a cup of tea. or peppermint and licorice, which is what I've been sipping on today. I do hope to see you again very soon, and I wish you a lot of happy thoughts, and don't forget, as Matt Mercer would say, to love each other.
They call them turkey tails.